Welcome. Scott here. Here is a quick boss guide for the upcoming event, Act 3 Chapter 8 Part 1, A Long Journey. This event will feature our first fight of the new SHINRYU difficulty in Global. We will be introduced a new weapon category, Force Weapon, which will allow you to activate the force time when your force gauge is maxed. This event will also feature the following units: Kain, Warrior of Light, Mog, Pernello, Kais and Prompto. Kain, Warrior of Light, Mog and Pernello will be getting their C90 awakenings. Kain's FR and his burst weapon will be making their debut. Kain FR partner is Urania from Final Fantasy XV. Both his burst and Warrior of Light's burst will be realizable. All 6 characters featured in the banner will be getting force enhancements unlocked. We will be fighting 2 floating eye. The floating eye has 60 million HP each. The turn requirement is 55. The HP requirements is 15,000. Before I continue further, here is a small disclaimer clause for the video. The guide is written based on the time that the event was released for the Japanese version. Please do note that it is possible that the boss fight mechanics might differ when the actual event is released in Global. As we are no longer have LUFENIA plus fights, the boss guide will be focused primarily on SHINRYU fights. In SHINRYU, you need to understand the effects gained by the boss as the force gauge build up, its force ability and its force time effect. As your party has low force levels at the start of the era, it is highly certain that the boss force gauge will build up faster than yours. To have a better understanding on the basics of the force gauge mechanics and SHINRYU fights, I have done a video explaining the mechanics. I have included the link to the video under the comments and video description for your quick reference. For this fight, the boss force gauge is broken into 5 thresholds. When the boss gauge is more or equal to 40%, it will apply a 10% max HP poison field. When the boss gauge is more or equal to 60%, it will apply a 20% max HP poison field. When the boss gauge is more or equal to 80%, it will apply a 30% max HP poison field. At the 100% threshold, the boss will use its force ability, Group Gaze, and activates its force time for 3 turns. The fight features a lot of debuff cleansers and evasion units in the form of Pernello, Mog and Warrior of Light. As the battle progresses, HP poison will weaken your party a lot. If any of your party members' HP drops to 50% and below, the boss will inflict 1 turn paralysis with any of their attacks. Debuff cleansing and debuff evasion could help you to avoid wasting turns due to the paralysis effect. The boss force ability, Group Gaze, is a guaranteed hit, Brave Gain, AoE HP attack that ignores HP nullification effects. It will inflict paralysis on any unit whose HP is 50% and below. Upon using the force ability, the boss will enter into its force time where the gauge will start to emit a red hue with counter of 3 on its gauge. When the force time is activated, the boss will use either one of these 2 skills. 1. Ultrasonics Plus, this is a single target Brave Gain, HP attack that ignores HP nullification effects. It will inflict paralysis if the target unit HP is 50% and below. 2. The second skill is something that you won't want it to trigger. Gaze Plus is a buff dispel instant KO attack. The conditions that result the boss using this attack is when one of the unit's HP drop to 30% and below. When the boss force time is activated, prioritizing in upkeeping your HP. Stacking HP damage can help to negate the HP poison effects. For example, you can stack Pernello HP Regan buff with Lena's Windrake buff or make use of overheals from units like Purim. The force time will only be deactivated after the bosses have taken a combined of 3 turns. You can temporarily freeze the boss force time by activating your own force time with a ranged-based force ability, which means Kane's force ability at the moment. Now let's proceed with some party setup recommendations. Recommended calls abilities. To ensure that you are able to constantly break them, it is important to inflict defense down debuffs. Example of calls abilities that inflict defense down calls are Ferris, Titus, Jack, and Vanille. To speed up the fight, using HP damage up debuff calls like Karasame, Seymour, Fran, Ignis, Lily-Set, Maria, and Dark Knight Cecil are useful. Although a bit trickier to use, Aura type HP damage up calls like Kamari, Alisai, Priyash, Leo and Locke are also viable. Most recently C90 units have Aura type HP damage up bonuses. You can use Dissidia DB Call Finder to find out more. The fight faces heavy amount of HP poison, calls provide strong overhealing, HP regen and debuff evasion are great for this fight. You can consider Purim, Paladin Cecil, Lena, and Sidor. Next, I will be covering units that will be useful to handle the fight mechanics. For any endgame fights like LUFENIA and SHINRYU, it is always recommended to bring supports for their aura and buffs. You can consider bringing Selphie, Lena, Ishtala, Yuna, Garnet, Purim, Rem, and Ramza. Both Selphie and Lena are great for this fight for their debuff evasion utility. Selphie can make your party hit hard with her guaranteed launch debuff while Lena can ensure your party is always safe with her powerful HP regen buffs. The fights feature a strong HP poison field applied once the boss force gauges reached the 40% mark. Maintain your HP in a healthy zone is important. Have a damage mitigator to draw their attention will help a lot. Other than the force ability, all of the boss attacks are non-guaranteed hit. You can bring counter tanks like Orin or Golov, evasion tank like Leela, Golov, or Edge or your standard brave damage mitigators like Zack or Snow. Traps tanks like Beatrix and Celis are also good options here. Leela is really good for this fight thanks to her evasion mechanics. The boss is weak against ranged attacks. So, bringing ranged attackers are great option for the fight. You can consider bring Cisnei, Vincent, Cloud, Noctis, Titus, Maria, Freya, or Laguna for the fight. When Kane's force ability is activated, they will benefit a lot from his force time bonuses for doing ranged damage. If you don't have Kain, Cisnei, Noctis, and Freya are good ranged follow-up substitutes. In this era, units with their force enhancement will offer additional advantage for the fight as they will gain bonuses from force time or when the force gauge is at least 80%. They will also gain bonuses to help the charging of your own force gauge, which means you can gain access to your force time earlier. As this is the first SHINRYU fight, I will elaborate more on their roles to the fight. If you don't have pulled Kain FR, you can gain access to the powerful force gauge by bringing a Kain FR friend. Kain FR with BT friends is a premium luxury to have in early SHINRYU and will continue to be one of the best friend support units for a while. You can build your force gauge to the max. Bringing in your Kain FR friend to activate the force gauge. Get into your own burst phase and abuse his powerful follow-up. Fulfilling his force conditions of dealing a full party launch or dealing ranged damage will enhance the damage bonuses during his force time. Pernlo is the first premium FR charger. If you have her force level max, she can supercharge the force gauge fast and give you big damage bonuses boost. At maxed force level, her instant turn haste Rumba S1 and high turn rate Regen Waltz S2 can boost 50% HP damage up bonus when in force time. Instant turn ability or high turn rate ability that does not do HP damage is a premium utility for force gauge charging. She also provided powerful HP regens and provide big burst healing with her EX. She can cleanse debuffs with her LD. For the other 4 units, they are more useful for the utility that they bring to the fight. I will briefly cover them. Having with their force level will help to speed up the charging of the force gauge. With his C90 awakenings, Warrior of Light offers powerful auras and damage mitigation shields that will keep your party safe. His lock and elude buff are very useful for the fight. Prompto is a decent ranged based evasion tank. When his LD buff is at stack 4, he can provide off-turn ranged link strike damage to supplement your own party damage. Mog also received a very decent C90 awakening upgrade. He can offer constant debuff cleansing from his abilities. He can provide great amount of burst healing with his LD. Kais is great for turn manipulation, and he can ensure that your party members can hit launches all day with his hero support buff. On the screen, you will see a timeline showing the HP thresholds triggers that you need to watch out for. Like LUFENIA, SHINRYU fights also features aura boosts for the boss when their HP are depleted to a certain threshold. The stats boosts are triggered at the start of the fight and 79%. Probably because this is an introductory fight to SHINRYU, the fight doesn't feature any new boss enemy type mechanic. The developers want to introduce us on how the enemy force time mechanics works. As mentioned earlier, the boss will activate HP poison field when its force gauge is charged to 40%, 60%, and 80%. The higher the gauge is charged, the higher the effect is the HP poison. When the gauge is maxed, the boss will unleash its force time ability, Group Gaze, which is a guaranteed hit, Brave Gain, AoE HP attack that ignores HP nullification effects. It will inflict paralysis on any unit whose HP is 50% and below. After that, the boss will enter into force time for 3 turns where its gauge bar will glow red. During force time activation, it uses either Ultrasonics Plus or Gaze Plus. When the force time is active, make sure that none of your character's HP falls below 30%, otherwise they will get KO by Gaze Plus, which is a single target KO attack. The other attack is Ultrasonics Plus, where the boss does a Brave Gain, HP attack that ignores HP nullification effects. To exit the enemy's force time, you need to give the bosses a total of 3 turns. If you have Kane's FR, you can freeze the boss gauge by having Kane activating the force time with the force ability command. Other than the force ability and related mechanics, the boss doesn't have any nasty attacks. However, do keep your HP up above 50% at all times, otherwise they will get inflicted by paralysis whenever the boss attacks. Overall, this fight is considered a challenging one as you are bound to face the force mechanics. The boss have a massive pool of HP that is equivalent to the recent Dimension and Transcendence Tier 9 fight. It is worth noting that the turn count for the fight is a strict 55 turns. Having Kane FR will make the fight a lot significantly easier. If you don't have Kane's FR, you can bring Kane FR friend to gain access to the powerful force time mechanics. If you have Kane fully built, do set your Kane as your friend support unit to help the community. Now let's proceed with the boss mechanics proper. Similar to any LUFENIA fights, for SHINRYU fights, the boss will also gain stats boosts and Brave Gain reduction auras when you deplete the boss's HP to a certain threshold. However, SHINRYU bosses will also gain HP damage reduction auras as well. The thresholds trigger for this fight is at the start of the fight and 79% HP threshold. At the start of the fight, it will boost its defense stats by 200%. It will raise its Brave Damage and Brave Gain reduction auras to 80%. It will also reduce your HP damage dealt by 50%. At 79% HP threshold, it will further boost its defense stats to 300% and the HP damage dealt reduction auras to 80%. To handle the defense stats boost, you can inflict defense down calls. To handle the Brave Gain reductions, you can bring a Brave Gain up support like Agrias, Ram, or Quistis. With the recent units released, you shouldn't have any problem in handling the Brave Gain or damage reduction auras. For HP damage reduction auras, HP damage up calls will only partly offset against the reductions. However, you can easily overwrite them with your party force time. As we progress through the era, we will gain access to units with FR that allows you to build up your force time HP damage bonuses up to 999%. Learning on how to take full advantage of the damage window in SHINRYU fight holds the key on how to make SHINRYU fights easier. Now, I will be covering the boss key mechanics in detail. This fight is focusing predominantly on boss force gauge mechanics. The boss has 2 basic attacks, Gaze or Thundaga. Thundaga is a single target brave attack while Gaze is a Brave Gain, HP attack. Do beware of paralysis if the targeted unit HP is below 50%. You will avoid this problem if you bring a debuff evasion unit like Warrior of Light, Selfie, or Lena. Alternatively, you can cleanse it with a debuff cleanser like Pernello, Mog or Yuna. Upkeeping your HP is more important due to the boss force gauge HP poison field mechanics. As long you can upkeep your HP well and your damage mitigation up at all times, you won't need to worry too much for boss related mechanics. I have come to the last slide of the guide. As this is the first Shinryu fight, there is a high possibility that you might not access to the powerful force time mechanics if you didn't get Kane's FR. So, I will be covering on how handle them if that happens. Let's start off with the easier scenario. In other words, you have gotten Kane's FR weapon. You can just simply build up your force gauge. Every action taken will build up the gauge. The pace of the gauge build-up will depends a lot on your party force level. The higher the force level, the faster the gauge will build. It is highly unlikely that the charging of your force gauge will be faster than the boss force gauge, so you will be bound to seeing the boss force mechanics. The strategy with Kain FR is quite simple: build up your gauge. Once it is fully charged, use Kane's force ability to activate your party force time. Abuse his force time mechanics by deploying units that help to fulfill his force time conditions. 1. If Pernello is at a high force level, you can abuse it with Pernello spamming her haste rumba while Kain firing lancets at the background. 2. You can gain damage bonuses if you score a full party launch. Units that can launch and delay will help a lot. 3. One of the key conditions for Kain FR is dealing ranged damage. Off-turn damage will also help to boost the damage bonus. Pairing units that deal off-turn ranged damage like Sasnii, Freya, or Noctis will help to amplify the build-up of HP damage bonuses. Pair them with a turn hogger like Titus and Terra. Titus is a premium alternative for this fight if you don't have Kain. His follow-up deals ranged damage. With HP regen buff, Titus can self-extend those buffs while ensure his HP is always safe while spamming his turns. Now let's talk about the harder option, or technically doing the fight without Kain FR. As the saying goes, if you don't have one, borrow one from your friend. If you have gotten Kain fully geared, do a favor for the community by setting up Kain as your friend support. Firstly, survive the enemy force time and give the boss 3 turns to deactivate the force time. Once your force gauge is maxed, swap out for Kain friend support. Activate his BT, LD, and followed by FR ability to initiate force time. If needed, heal him up before sending him up into the air. Once he is in the air, abuse the lancets with the force time damage bonuses and the boss will die in a jiffy. As the turn count is tight and the boss has a massive pool of HP, make use of off-turn damage while stacking BT auras is a necessity to ensure you meeting the turn count. If you have Leela, she will be very useful for this cycle thanks to her evasion with free turn mechanics. It is doable without friend FR support, but do expect the turn count to be extremely tight. On the right side of the screen, I have provided some additional tips in handling this fight. Bring HP regen calls or burst healing calls if your party don't have HP regen utility. The HP regen will reduce the effect of the nasty HP poison. Healing calls options include Purim, Paladin Cecil, Lena, Sidor, Rem, Pernello, Mog or Rude. As the boss could trigger paralysis whenever your character's HP is below 50% with their attacks, having debuff evasion support like Lena or Selfie or debuff cleanser like Mog or Yuna in your party will help a lot to minimize wasted turns due to paralysis effect. To dispel the boss force time, you need to give the boss 3 turns. If you are trying to damage race to finish while that effect is up, beware that you might not meet the HP requirements for the fight and thus end up resetting your run. With this, I have come to the end of my boss guide presentation. Hopefully you find it useful. If you like the video, please give a like. Please subscribe to my channel for future gaming content. Good luck for the fight in the coming days. Bye.